Welcome to RajaReads. I'm Masood Raja, and on this channel I introduce you to literature and fiction from different parts of the world, but especially from what we call the postcolonial literary world. Today I will introduce you to one more novel, this time from the Caribbean, from the island nation of Trinidad and Tobago. And it is a novel by Earl Lovelace, The Dragon Can't Dance. Earl Lovelace, The Dragon Can't Dance. So I'll first briefly introduce the author and then give you the plot of the novel and some of the main characters. And then I hope to point to certain things to look for as you read the novel and what kind of literary scholarship exists about the novel. So that's roughly the plan, and I hope you enjoy this introduction to Earl Lovelace's The Dragon Can't Dance. So Earl Lovelace is probably one of the most prominent African Trinidadian author. Now remember, Trinidad and Tobago have two world-class prominent authors. One is, of course, V.S. Naipaul, who is a Nobel laureate, and he comes from the Indo-Trinidadian community and then eventually settles in England, whereas Lovelace comes from the African Creole Trinidadian tradition, and he has mostly lived and taught and written in Trinidad and Tobago. He's also famous for his other novel, Salt, which is a highly regarded novel, but so is this one. Now, The Dragon Can't Dance is set in this urban poor community called Calvary Hill, and it is a predominantly Afro-Trinidadian community from very, very poor urban classes. That is the setting of the novel. That's the neighborhood whose culture Lovelace captures for us. Now, it is also a character-driven novel because the main character of the novel is Aldrich. He is the dragon. And by that, what I mean is that he's an artist and he spends a whole year preparing his dragon costume, which he wears during the 3 days of the annual carnival. Now, carnival is a huge tradition in Trinidad, and different communities put together their carnival troops and they compete for the first position. And you learn as you read the novel about the significance of carnival, but also preparation for it in the novel. And Aldrich is the dragon. That is his job. Every year he creates a costume, the dragon costume. Now, living in the community is also Miss Cleotilda, who is kind of like the queen figure. She is richer than others, lives in a nicer home, but offers herself as a community leader and as part of the community, even though as we read it, we understand that she is also financially way more secure and above the average denizens of Calvary Hill. Her enforcer is a character named Guy. He is educated, has a job, but he also kind of enforces Miss Cleotilda's will because she's also the landlord or the landlady in this neighborhood, and he collects the rents and everything else. Then the way Lovelace introduces further complexity in the novel is by introducing two Indo-Trinidadian characters, Periyag and Dolly. They are a newly married couple. Periyag has started his own small little business. He sells things on his bicycle. But he has moved to this poor neighborhood so that they can live away from their rural family and its pulls and pressures. And part of the struggle that they have is the struggle of living in predominantly African Trinidadian community. And the clashes, not the clashes, but the misunderstandings that occur between the two. Now, a lot of people read it as a racial tension thing, but in one of my articles I had pointed out that it's not necessarily racial, it is actually the problem of both sides not understanding the context of where they're coming from. So if you are up and coming Indian entrepreneur and you move into an urban African Trinidadian community where all aspects of financial upward mobility are kind of derided and seen as suspect, and if you foreground your own economism, obviously there is going to be some friction. So part of the story is about how finally Periyag and Dolly kind of get accepted in the community, and how Periyag eventually succeeds, and what kind of possibilities could Aldrich and Periyag have in becoming friends or allies if they had ever sat together and talked about it. Then within the novel is the local tough guy, Fisheye. He's the one who polices the border of the neighborhood, and he has his own other tough guys. And they represent the kind of young men whose job is it to police the borders of the community, but also to sometimes enforce whatever social taboos or social rules apply to Calvary Hill community. So these are some of the characters, and the plot is starting with Aldrich being deeply steeped in his role as the dragon, and then by the end of the novel reaching a realization that maybe what he's been doing is not revolutionary, but also keeps him implanted within the larger design of the system within the neighborhood, but also beyond, and he starts reflecting on their role as the dragon and whether or not he wants to dance next year or not. And that's a huge transformation in his character that you see over the novel. There are certain other themes as well. We are introduced not only to the carnival as a cultural event, but calypso music, right? And we are also introduced to how calypso gets appropriated by American and other labels, and how do they commodify it. And the figure who carries that story is that of Philo, who is a local calypsonian and who gets discovered, and his songs start playing on the radio and elsewhere, and he becomes rich and successful. And the novel then shows us this struggle that most minority characters have in a lot of novels, is that if they become successful, they're moving into the so-called white man's world. So how do they come back to their own communities and justify that they are still the same people? Philo kind of introduces us to that experience. Another thing that we are introduced to in the novel is the culture of steel drums, right? How do local kids create a steel drum? What do they play? And then when they make a band, how do they compete? And there too, what we see is the encroachment of commodified, capitalized sponsors who have taken up this street performance, this music of the streets, and corporatized it and made it into a commodity. All these things are woven through this novel. So overall, I mean, as I always say on my other channel, no novel or story can carry the burden of an entire culture. But if you want a novel that would introduce you to some really interesting Afro-Trinidadian characters and their interaction with at least a couple who are Indo-Trinidadian, and then see how that urban poor culture functions artistically, politically, and socially, right? This would be the novel for that. And it will also then introduce you to Trinidad and Tobago and the particularities of their own culture. Now, another thing to keep in mind is that since the encounter between Periyag and Dolly is staged as if the Afro-Trinidadians are a majority and the Indo-Trinidadians are a minority, please keep in mind that in Trinidad and Tobago, both the populations, the ethnic Indian populations and African populations, are pretty much evenly divided. And they also have two ethnically aligned political parties that compete for power. And do keep in mind that the Indian labor was introduced in Trinidad and Tobago after the British abolished slavery. And when they abolished slavery, the West Indians or the East Indians were brought in as indentured laborers, and they mostly form the rural communities in Trinidad. Now, what that also teaches us that the two communities of African Trinidadians and Indo-Trinidadians already enter history within colonialism in a conflictual history, because one has been freed, but they're not being offered jobs. Their jobs are being offered to this new people who have brought in as indentured subjects. And so those tensions carry on in so many ways in today's politics in Trinidad and Tobago as well, which points to the long-term impact of any colonial exchange and what does it do to local populations or deracinated populations who are brought in to work the farms and plantations. So overall, once again, a brilliantly written novel of Trinidad and Tobago, which tells the story of a poor urban community called Calvary Hill. And I highly recommend that you read it. And if you're a scholar, I have an article on it. I can post a link to it. But if you're a scholar of postcolonial studies or Caribbean studies, this would be a really, really great novel to study from the point of view of race, from the point of view of urban versus rural divide, from the point of view of capitalism and how does it go out in the world and commodify things that are integral parts of different cultures. These all could be some of the issues that you could research and write about. So that is all. Just a brief introduction to Earl Lovelace's The Dragon Can't Dance. Please read it and then let me know what you think about it. Anything that comes to your mind after you read it, post it in the comments and I'll be very happy to answer your questions. Hope you're taking care of yourself. Take care of yourself and the others around you, and I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.